Hi, everybody. This is David Sereda. This is going to be my last talk for a while on the Gnostic Christian series that I've been doing for many months now. And so we've gone through a lot of the missing or rediscovered early Christian manuscripts. And we can see the big iconoclasm is that you have to actually participate and do work on yourself to be saved. It's not as simple as just being baptized, and that there are several stages to an interior illumination process. And this illumination process is actually evident in the canonized scriptures. It's just that when we read it, we come from the perspective that we don't have to do anything because we've been saved, and therefore we can live our life a complete mess, and we're going to come out on top in the end because Jesus is going to save us. But if you look at Matthew 6:22, just open your canonized Bible to Matthew 6:22, and in the King James Version, it says the light of the body is the eye, but if your eye is single, your whole body shall be filled with light. But if your eye is dark or evil, you'll be filled with darkness. Now, that statement, if you really look at it, does not say that you don't have to do anything, does it? So why is Jesus saying this? If you're completely saved, being baptized, why do you have to do anything? And if your eye isn't single, which means you're in duality, which is judgment, because you go from singularity to the knowledge of good and evil, which is judgment. And if you take judgment upon yourself, you're going to get in a lot of trouble because you're going to get in a lot of fights and a lot of wars. But it says if your eye is single, you'll be filled with light. And I've been meditating every day for 45 years, and I can tell you the experience of having your body filled with light is the purest, highest vibrational ecstasy that absolutely conquers the perception of suffering. It absolutely conquers the perception of suffering, but it is a lifetime achievement to be able to have your whole body filled with light, which Jesus is saying in Matthew 6:22. And Matthew 6:22 gets changed in all the New Testament translations to, if your eye is good, you'll be filled with light, and if your eye is bad, you'll be filled with darkness. But that's not what it says. It actually says if your eye is single. And because, in fact, from the Greek, because Matthew is a Greek manuscript, by the way. It was never written in English. It was written in Greek when they found it. And in the Greek, there were two choices from the original word. One was simple and one is single. And they both mean the same thing, because when you're not in duality, when you're not in conflict, you become simple. In fact, you don't have to choose because you're not sucked into being judgmental. So it's saying that if you can become this perfectly simple person who doesn't cast judgment, who's not in duality, your body will be filled with light. And you should feel that, right? Because if your body's filled with light, you should actually see it and feel it, because it's God's light. But it's saying if is the key operating word. Now, it doesn't say that if you're baptized, your eye will become single and you'll be filled with light. It says if your eye becomes single, you will be filled with light. And if your eye is full of darkness, you'll be full of darkness. So that alone means you have to do a self-inquiry into yourself. Are you full of darkness? Are you suffering from depression? Are you not full and don't have the ability to feel love on a daily basis? Are you full of darkness? Because if you do a self-examination, whether you're a Christian or not, you have to answer the question, am I full of light? And if you say that you are, then you got it. But if you say you're suffering from depression and anger and resentment, then you're full of darkness. And it doesn't matter because you've been baptized, you're not instantly full, are you? So this single passage in Matthew 6:22 points right down the avenue to the whole message of the non-canonized scriptures of Philip, of Thomas, of the secret book of John, which says that the human race was cast to the lowest region of matter, and that we need to activate the luminous seed, the epinoia, which is the luminous thought in Greek, to become illuminated, as in Matthew 6:22. So all you have to do is look at yourself and say, do my beliefs and what I believe in my religion fill me up with light? Am I full of light? And if you are, you are. Only you would know. But I can tell you that speaking to enormous numbers of Christians in my lifetime, there's absolutely no guarantee that they are full of light at all. In fact, many of them suffer from depression. Many of them commit suicide. Many of them commit incredible crimes against other human beings in their lifetime. And so there is no transformation that fits Matthew 6:22 at the time of the baptism. It's an initiation, is what the Gnostic scripture is telling us. It's the beginning. It's the entry point. But you're not saved until you're illuminated, until you're born again. And being born again means you're actually born into the light. Now, do we have to wait till the time of death to experience this illumination? That's not what Jesus is saying, even in the canonized scriptures, because in the canonized scriptures, he says, seek you first the kingdom of heaven, and then everything else, meaning your food and your clothing and your shelter, will be added unto you. So he's saying to seek the kingdom of heaven first. That's an act of doing. That's not you just sitting there saying, I'm a believer, I'm saved, and meanwhile, you're suffering. And you're caught in suffering, and you're not. And this is not an easy thing to admit to oneself. It's very difficult to admit this to oneself, that if I'm not full of light, that I'm full of darkness. And how does the Lord save you from being full of darkness if you don't participate? See, the only difference in the what is called Gnosticism, although it's not, Gnosticism is not a religion. It was called Gnosticism because the early Christians, who were the apostles themselves, as we've demonstrated in all of these different pieces of work that have been discovered and retranslated into the English language and other languages in the world. And we can see this huge difference in our understanding that there's work to be done. It's not as simple as just being baptized and getting forgiven every Sunday in church. In fact, there's nothing in even the canonized scriptures that says that you need to be constantly redeemed to be filled with this light that is spoken of in Matthew 6:22. It's a realization that if your eye is single, simple, non-judgmental, not caught up in the trap of judging others and getting yourself into fights and wars, that you will become peaceful, simple. And if you become simple and peaceful, because that's the real translation into English from the Greek, not good. It does not say if you become good, because the original Greek word does not translate as the word good in English. But yet somehow these New Way Bibles say that it means good. It doesn't mean good, because if you read the Greek to the English, it means single or simple. So that is a lifetime achievement. It is not easy for a person to go through their life and not cast judgment. Like, when's the last time you've casted judgment? Thinking you thought you were right and your friend or the person, your family member, was wrong. How many times have you done that? Well, we're not supposed to do it at all, because we're not the ones who judge. It's God who judges, not us. So when we're humble in our own self, that means we try to do the best thing we can, but we don't even judge ourselves and our failings, because we fail, right? We fail, and that's because we're human. But the promise is, if we become single in our eye, which our eye is the way we perceive everything. So if we perceive everything in a non-conflicted state, we become peaceful. We therefore, because we don't cast judgment, are not going to get into fights, right? We're not going to pick fights, and we're not going to try to win fights, because we know what happens when people think they want to fight is eventually somebody comes along and wants to fight them and beat them. That's the nature of it. That's the nature of the beast, which is to put a person's mind from innocence and purity and singularity and non-judgmentalism and total love, total undivided love. That's the goal here. But the work of attaining this singular state is what Jesus is asking in Matthew 6:22. So there's nothing that says that if you're baptized, you're going to attain this. There's nothing that if you're baptized says that when he says to seek the kingdom of heaven first and everything else will be added unto you, the seeking is a lifetime of work. You have to find the kingdom of heaven within. And that's also evident in the canonized scripture, that the kingdom of heaven is within you. But yet, if you don't feel it, if you admit to yourself, do I feel empty and vacant inside myself? Do I feel depressed and full of darkness? That's a starting point. And if you can admit that that's what you feel, then your eye is not single, that you're not simple, and that you're trapped in judgment. So how do you get out of it? See, how do you get out of it and come to this promise of having your body filled with light? Because if your eye becomes single, your whole body will be filled with light. Now, I experience this every single day when I meditate and I pray. There's so much ecstasy in God within that you can't, there's more than you can possibly bear. So when you think of reaping the harvest, it's not a small amount of love. It's not a small amount of ecstasy in God. It's enormous. There's more than any human being could possibly bear the sight of if you become single enough. So that the idea that this work and this agreement, I mean, I agree with baptism, and so do the Gnostics, and so do, which are the early Christians, which are the apostles of Jesus, the ones that got kicked out of the mainstream story. The baptism is an initiation, and the anointing, which is the chrism, which is where the word Christ in Greek comes from, because Christ is not an Aramaic or Hebrew word, it is a Greek word. So it didn't exist at the time of Christ. So there was no Christ. There was Messiah. Messiah means the anointed one. So going from baptism to being anointed, and when a person is anointed, they are full of light. They do become highly illuminated, and we can see many examples like Vibia Perpetua, Thecla, the uh, the woman in who was an apostle, who was in a Christian student, if you will, of the apostle Paul, and we saw her illumination. We saw how she got illuminated. We saw examples of what happened when the early Christians attained the illuminated state. So it's very different than what we see in Christianity today. In today's Christianity, there's a promise that because of the baptism and being saved, that at the time of death, the person gets lifted out of their suffering. But that's not what Matthew 6:22 says. It says you have to do this work. You have to become non-judgmental. You have to become judgeless yourself, and you have to enter the simple state, the singular state, and then you will experience the light of God. And that is very different. And I don't know how we can skip through these obvious signs even in the canonized literature, because the canonized apostles' testimony still has the truth within it. It's still there. So how do we take responsible? Judge not lest you be judged. Yeah, that's exactly it. But how do you do that inside yourself? Because to not judge yourself and to be a Christian, I identify myself, David Sereda, as a Christian. Jesus Christ is my personal savior. But that doesn't mean I stop there. I don't stop there. I pray and meditate every single day because I've seen him with my own eyes. I know he's the King of heaven. I've seen him. I've met many of the most enlightened people on the planet, and there's nobody that compares to him. Not even as a grain of sand to the sun would even that wouldn't be a comparison. There's nobody that compares to him. So I'm way past that. But even though there's nobody who compares to him, still doesn't transform the person. What interests me about the Gnostic scriptures that have emerged and have been translated into the English language since the mid to late 80s. And I met some of the translators in person. I went to Elaine Pagel's lectures at University of Southern California, and she's a Princeton University scholar and a very, very well educated woman. You know, I've read the works of Paula Fredrickson and many other people who were part of these projects to translate these scriptures that were missing in the story. And I can say in a living testament that I have experienced this illumination on a daily basis now for over 5 years. But it took me my whole life to come to it. It's not easy to, even if you stop judgment, it's still going to be a long time before the flash of light comes within you and you experience the interior illumination. When the interior illumination appears, it conquers. There's not one temptation in this world. You could give me all the money of Bill Gates or Elon Musk, and if I had to trade that for what I found, I wouldn't take it because it's worthless. Why is it worthless? Because when you die, you've got nothing but what you have within. When you die, you've got, this is in the Gospel of Philip. If you don't attain the resurrection, the illuminated self, when you live, when you die, you'll receive nothing. That's a pretty drastic statement in Philip. I don't know if I really agree with it, but it is written in the Gospel of Philip that if you don't do the work on yourself, when you die, you'll receive nothing, like nothing. I think that's a little drastic for Philip to state. But if Jesus said that to Philip, and that's his testimony, you can't argue with it. It means we have to come to at least the 51% mark, where we have more than 50% of us that is love, that is made out of love. And the choices we make in our life should be at least at the 51% mark. That means that you just came out of the darkness, and there's enough love in you for God to reach you and pull you into the light. But if you make choices in your life that are completely supporting the dark, completely supporting crime, theft, greed, selfishness, how are you going to do it? I don't know, because I can't even make that judgment. I don't know. All I can say is what the scriptures tell us is we have to do a certain amount of work to find the kingdom of heaven within, and to find that flash of light that we feel, that love, and where the love really is in our personal lives, and what are the choices we make that allow us to feel more of that love. And those are the choices we have to make, because if when we die we feel nothing, how does God save us? Maybe there's a way. Maybe the statement in Philip is wrong. Maybe after a brutal life of being a human being, and the love of God comes for you at the moment of death, you're just ready to soak it all in and receive it. And in that moment, you become singular, full of love. See, singular means, see, you can't love one and hate the other, right? That's why why did Jesus say to love your enemies? In fact, loving your enemies is a work, isn't it? It's not easy to do. How are you going to love your enemies really? Because he's actually telling you to do this. The reason he's telling you to love your enemies is he's trying to tell you to have no judgments. No judgments, not even upon your enemies. How powerful is that? So that means to become completely non-judgmental, we have to love our enemies and do good to those that persecute us. Wow, that's not easy, is it? It's incredibly difficult. So, but that's how you become singular. That's how you become non-dualistic. That we no longer buy into good and evil, because we're going to love our enemies. And he says, what good does it do you if you just love those that agree with you, and you don't love those that disagree with you? And that's exactly what we do, right? We tell our daughters that you can't marry somebody who is on the other side of the fence or has a different religious belief. I mean, what is that, right? So we tell our own children, you can only love on this side of the fence. So but yet, you know how God works. God is so mysterious. Your child will come home and fall in love with somebody who completely disagrees with the family. Because that's how God is. God is so good. It's showing you where your walls are, and where you only love the people that agree with you. The people that go to your own church and they say amen. Like we all see Jesus the same way. But if somebody sees him a different way, or somebody sees God a different way, you're going to outcast them. And that's not the message. See, the message in Matthew 6:22 alone is so massive. It's one statement that if your eye becomes single, which is truly good, and true goodness doesn't have a division. It's not a judgment. Actually, true goodness is that you feel goodness and love towards your enemies as much as you do your family. Because you're trying to bring everybody together. I mean, Jesus was trying to bring everybody together in this unified field of love and light. And it's not just love. It is true ecstasy. It is true. The purest joy comes from the pure heart in God. And when you experience the pureness of the purity and the pure joy, you won't crave the corrupted lusts of the world. Those things don't really give you pleasure anyway. They give you something, we know the world is crazy for all kinds of corruptions right now. Power, everybody wants to be a billionaire, everybody wants to be the most powerful person in the neighborhood, so they get the most respect, and everybody falls at their feet. Well, that's nothing. I wouldn't trade that for what I feel every day when I pray. I wouldn't trade that for anything, because I don't want people to respect me as a billionaire. I'm not a billionaire. I'm not even a millionaire. And today, a millionaire in the 1980s is like somebody who was worth $100,000. So I'm not even worth $100,000 in the 1980s. So, because that's how much inflation has gone up. I mean, if you're a millionaire today, it's actually nothing. It's like being worth $100,000 in 1980. It's the same thing, because it buys you the same thing. So the goal here is a work, and that is the message of, see, the Gnostic scriptures only further glorify Christ. They don't diminish him in any way. Why they were removed? Because you can clearly see they show women inequality in the relationship of Jesus Christ, as we say his name in the modern world. But they clearly, the Roman Empire as it was falling did not want women co-ruling the new future world with men. So they kicked them all out. Every gospel that made a woman look, cooperatively important in the Christian story had to be eradicated, because this was going to be an all-male god, an all-male story, just as the god Zeus and Jupiter was to the Romans was going to be. They were not going to have females. And that is one thing you can see evident in all of the Gnostic scriptures, is that any apostle who showed a story of women getting illuminated, that story was removed. And it takes a lot of courage. I agree. It takes a lot of courage to love Jesus and understand that women should have had equal rights in the church. And if they did, we probably wouldn't have all this abuse of children and minors. And it's not just children and minors who get abused in the churches. I mean, people get financially abused. They get the fear of God driven down their throat, and then they give away their entire inheritance to the church. See, that's a form of abuse. That's a massive form of abuse. And that form of abuse is not talked about enough. And if you look at the financial numbers, the Christian churches of America are raking in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Staggering amounts of money. And what do they do with it? They use it for, according to the lawsuits and the investigations, they use it mostly for themselves, to enrich themselves and live in huge ranches and have huge mansions and drive fancy cars. And they believe that that's what Jesus wants for them, to steal your money to do that, instead of building housing for the homeless and underprivileged families and single parents who are losing their children to foster care because they can't raise their own children. There's 200,000 American children every year enter foster care, and inside of that system, thousands of them are killed every year on American soil. I would say that's where the money should go, but that's not where the money goes. So you have massive corruption, massive corruption. But how is it? And I know this because I know my lectures in my own meetings with Christ and the Gnostic literature are not popular. The most number of views I've gotten is 600. So, somebody can get 2 or 3 million views of their dog doing tricks, and I can't get more than 600 people to watch these. That tells me that people are afraid. They're afraid of the testimony of the other apostles, for sure, because it involves women. And it's going to take, to change the situation on the planet today, in the face of this religion, it is going to take a lot of women to suddenly come to a point in themselves where they realize they were ripped off and that they're part of this story. And their role in this story should be equal to that of men. And to bring balance to the church of the future, it's going to take a lot of women to step up to the plate and become that courageous. And I don't see it happening anytime soon. I can tell you there are very few people on earth today that have read all these manuscripts that I have and know them intimately very, very well. So well that they would go out and speak about them in public churches, because even in the churches where we have women acting as priests, they're not talking about this at all. They're talking about the canonized story. And that's a step forward, because those are women that have the divine right as men do, because they were created by God as much as men were, to tell this story and act as priests. But the story that's in the Gnostics is not being told. It's very unpopular. And maybe because the fear that somehow you'll go to hell if you start preaching these what the Catholic Church calls heresy, meaning lies, then maybe that fear is why this isn't popular, and why these talks are not popular. So I'm going to end this today, because I think I've talked enough and given examples of what is written in these scriptures, and it's really up to people to go and read them if they want to know. But from what I can see, look, I've been in world media for 23 years. I've been on every major news network in America. Been on CNN, Fox, History Channel, Discovery Channel, Learning Channel, Nature Channel. I've been on Art Bell, George Norrie. I've been on hundreds and hundreds of radio shows and private podcasts. I've been doing this for 23 years. This is the least popular thing I've ever spoken of. And the response is tiny. So that means nobody's interested. And it will be in my own private belief that these scriptures are true. And I'll know the moment I die that what is the truth and what's not the truth. I mean, maybe some of them aren't true. I mean, maybe some of the canonized scriptures are not true, because they're quite old too. They're copies that were written in Greek over 150 years after the time of Christ, which is a very long time, incredibly long time. Enough time to create a tremendous amount of error. But there are good authors like Elaine Pagels, Paula Fredrickson, and others who have worked on the translation. James Robinson of the Nag Hammadi Library Project. There's quite a number of people who have read these works, but the works themselves have not led to a reformed physical church, and physical church attendance is plummeting worldwide. I mean, plummeting when we look at real numbers. And so when the new generations are throwing out the old belief systems, and if they don't have a new way to find God within themselves to replace what they're throwing out, they're left with nothing. I mean, nothing. So how can you have a civilization that is completely agnostic, meaning they believe in a higher power, but they're not going to do anything about it? They may believe in some higher power in the universe, but they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to congregate. I mean, one of the most beautiful things is that in the tradition of Christianity was that people would congregate on Sunday mornings and the holidays, and they would get together and share meals and get together and communicate, form communities around the churches. But when you have your church attendance falling through the roof, and a lot of that is because of the abuse of the miners and the abuse of the First Nation Indians of Canada and the United States, all these stories are coming out. People have less and less interest in those people as role models, but they clearly don't have much interest in this either, because because there's not a lot of people talking about this like I am. There's not a lot of people that have read this stuff for 20 years. I've read and studied this stuff for over 20 years. That's why I know it so well. I can walk my way through any of these pieces of work. And there are more pieces of work worth reading, but they really just repeat most of the message that so far that I've shared with you. But anyway, thank you for those of you who have been here and taken a look at this. I urge you to read them in completion when you get time in your life, especially when people reach in their retirement years. They have more time to read, and go really slowly through each piece. Don't try to get through it. Try to really understand it and really take it inside of yourself, because you don't know that something is true until you've had an experience at some level of your faith with it. At some level, part of you knows that there's light in these ancient words that have been rediscovered and retranslated. But just for those of you who are interested, also, you can always go through them, because all of them are archived on my YouTube channel, and you can look further at repeats, because sometimes when you go through a material more than once, I've gone through all of these manuscripts multiple times, especially my favorite ones like the Apocryphon of John and the Acts of John. I love Philip. I've gone through Philip so many times, both the Acts of Philip and the Gospel of Philip, and there's so many little secrets that I miss in Philip, and I go through it again, and I go through it again, and I go through it again, and that's that's how you build a relationship with it. Does anybody have any questions?
They're suggesting you should get your videos onto Gaia.
No, Guy is not interested in this subject. I know them very well. I know a lot of the producers there are very interested in this subject, and I've been there and we've had this conversation. And again, the owner is very smart. He knows that very few people are going to want to watch this stuff. They're not. It's a very small amount of people, and maybe that's what. How are we going to transform the Christian message? How are we going to rebuild the church? Are we going to keep proliferating what we've done in the past? Well, it doesn't work anymore, because the new generation isn't getting anything out of it. I read this incredible book by Brian Murawski called the Immortality Code, and he describes himself as a kid being baptized and feeling nothing, feeling completely empty inside, and wondering where's the real Christianity. And he comes up with this theory that the early sacraments in the first churches in what are now the catacombs buried underneath the Vatican today, women were coming up with these incredible little discs of bread that were full of hallucinogenic medicine. Because this new movement towards the hallucinogenic medicine, the people who take those things have some kind of a mystical experience, and they don't know that experience is possible without any hallucinogenics at all. I don't use any hallucinogenics. I don't use any drugs, and I go into these illuminated states every day, and it's the best thing in my life. God is the best thing in my life. Jesus and God is the best thing in my life. Every single day when I meditate, I'm so full of light and ecstasy. I transmit that to my children, and they feel it. And that's real food, right? That's the real food that we eat, is the love and the vibrations. And if every family had a method of tuning in to the source that fills them up and fills them with light, so that there is no emptiness and darkness, and that's the love that you share with your family, then we'd all be lit up, wouldn't we? So yeah, those things are natural. Yeah, I agree with Nancy. DMT is naturally occurring if you know how to open your heart where the thymus gland up here and the pineal gland, pituitary gland make DMT naturally. I mean, my dad and I have incredible conversations about this. He's a PhD in educational psychology from Berkeley, and he's in his early 80s today. And he's saying there are higher chemicals. There's 9 neurochemicals, and there's higher ones than DMT that the body will produce. So why is it that we need to take chemicals to get high? Because we've lost these techniques that are evident even in the early Christian movement. The vowel toning, the use of the staff as a frequency rod, the singing and the sitting into the silence instead, and doing the self inquiry on these and pondering these questions. If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be filled with light. So how do I do that? Right? That's a teaching. That's a meditation. So the the loss of the natural way to human light and ecstasy. I mean, I remember going to church in Los Angeles, and they had these great musicians playing, and I did feel really high. The energy was really good in there. I mean, there were good vibes in there. Everybody's feeling really good, and that's what I fear is we will lose. We lose community. We lose coming together in the common love of Jesus Christ and the apostles and the Holy Family and God and the prophets. We lose that because if church attendance is plummeting, which it is, that's what we're told in statistics, then why can't we transform our churches? I mean, I remember going to this little bitty church in California, in Southern California, and the minister, I told him about my meetings with Jesus, and he was very disturbed. He was in the middle of conning a young celebrity out of $2 million, which he did. He conned her out of $2 million. And after that woman was what became a huge drug addict. She was almost dead. She felt God had totally deceived her because her minister was just there to con her out of money. See, those are worse crimes. They're as bad or worse than the rape of our children, because they totally destroy a person's soul, that to the point that they thought God did this to them, that they were led into this church to learn the Bible, to learn the word of Christ, and then they're getting conned out of their life savings. And then the minister and his wife go running off to the Bahamas. And that actually happened. This happens all over the world. And that leads to the plummeting of church attendance too, doesn't it? Because people are saying if the minister isn't receiving the light of God, because if you really receive the light of God, you're lit up on the inside. You feel better than anything. There's no drug on earth that can make you feel like that. There's nothing that can make you feel like that. There's no wine that can make you feel like that. But if we lose our ritual and our ability to come together, then what have we got when you throw it all out? So I'm saying we need to transform church. We need a church that is perfectly balanced between male and female leadership, and also oversight, so that we don't have money corruption, and we don't have the corruption of the children. We don't have corruption of minors. We don't have sexual abuse of anybody in the church. They should be protected in there. And yet this still goes on to this day. I still hear stories, even in my little bitty town, of a young child that was abused by the priest years ago, and now their mental illness and their suffering has ruined their life. We're still dealing with this, and yet we still perpetuate the myth that the church is ruled by men and women can't come in there and cooperatively, deliver the Sunday sermon and protect the children. We got to transform it, because if we don't transform it, we got nothing. Then how do you have what's going to be next? What's it going to take next? If we throw out the church and nobody attends it, what's the new way? That's what I want to know. What's the new way that people are going to do? And the people have all the power, because it's whatever they follow that becomes big. When the Roman Empire was collapsing because of the Christian movement, it's the Christian movement that destroyed the Roman Empire. It's very clear that's what did it. The people, it demonstrated the people have all the power. They're not going to worship Zeus anymore. They're not going to worship Caesar as the embodiment of Jupiter, or Mercury. They're not going to do that anymore, because this new religion is telling these poor people that they can go to the kingdom of heaven before their rich oppressors. They're done with it. They're not going to be paying taxes to the Roman gods anymore. So when that happened, when that shift happened, what we saw, especially when the Christians burned Rome to the ground in about 70 AD under Nero, the Roman rulers realized we don't have any power. It's the people that have all the power. But if the people don't see the gift of God finding this young boy named Muhammad, who dug up all these manuscripts and found them in the clay jars, and they get translated and they get distributed all over the planet, and nobody transforms the belief system because the Pope says it's all heresy. So if the Pope says it's heresy, then the Christian churches say it's heresy. So then you don't have transformation, because everyone believes them. I guess they do. Because why? Because they're afraid that if they believe in heresy, they're going to go to hell. And that's powerful. That's what I'm saying. It takes a lot of courage. It takes, you have to come out of the genius way that they oppressed the women in the early Christian movement, the way they eradicated them. It was genius how they did it, because they put the fear of hell in people. And once you put the fear of hell in them, they're not going to mess with anybody. They're going to just follow whatever they tell them. So we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to sign off for tonight. I am gonna do a series on the mountains of God, which is another subject that really interests me, and how a prophet literally starts communing with God on a whole mountain, and even the mountain called divination and joy that Jesus prayed on, how the mountain itself becomes literally like a castle of God on the earth, and how these certain mountains become very, very sacred in many different religions, actually. And that's another subject that really interests me, because if you when you go on a pilgrimage on these certain holy mountains, the saint or the prophet that lived on that mountain seems to have actually physically transformed the mountain, so that the moment your feet touch the mountain, people start to have a religious or mystical experience. But thank you everyone for tuning in, those of you who tuned in. And I
Dude,
hope,
I don't see any questions really,
yeah,
other than
a few
other
comments. But again,
comments.
I appreciate, I made a big effort here. I thought it would be bigger than this, but sadly I think most people want to watch dog and cat videos on YouTube. So have a great time. Talk to you later.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, everyone who's here. His lives are on his YouTube channel, and David Van Valet, you were asking about putting it on YouTube. We can't, because it's coast. It belongs to Coast to Coast, and so you either have to be a member of Coast to Coast or Gaia. You're welcome, Yvette. I agree with you, Corey, regarding women, etc. Yeah, anytime he mentions a link and he said he's providing a link for us, make sure you watch it right away because it'll be gone in 48 hours or so because it's a link he's creating because of his account on Gaia, but he only can share it for 48 hours. Dean, I've studied the Vedas and Guru Granth Sahib, yes. I'm sure David has too, probably not to the extent I have, but certainly he has. David Van Boy, thank you. Out of curiosity, have you had a chance to? I think I got all the questions. Anybody have any other questions? Maybe just type them again if you typed them earlier and I missed them. Okay, everyone. Good night. Good night, Nancy. I'm going to end the broadcast.